The story began in a quiet town where silence had weight, where every shadow seemed to lean closer when secrets were whispered. There was a girl there, her name spoken in hushed voices, as though saying it too loudly might disturb the fragile balance between life and death. She had been sick for longer than anyone could recall, though the sickness itself seemed stranger than any illness the townsfolk knew. It wasn't simply weakness or fever. It was something that clung to her like a shadow that would not leave, a sickness that seemed almost watchful. Her name was Clara, and Clara's life had become a room filled with unanswered questions. She rarely left her bed now, the window her only connection to the world outside. The pale curtain stirred each time the wind crept through the cracked frame, and when it did, she would turn her face toward the light as though she were listening, waiting, straining to catch something carried by that restless breeze. Visitors came and went, neighbors, church folk, even strangers who claimed to have heard of her condition from miles away. They all said the same things, words of comfort, promises of prayers, tokens left on her nightstand as if charms could guard her from what no medicine had managed to cure. And yet Clara endured not living, not dying, but waiting. It was the waiting that unsettled people most, because no one knew what she was waiting for. Then one evening, gray, brittle, heavy with the kind of stillness that made the heart uneasy, Clara made her request. It was quiet, yet it carried the weight of thunder. She asked for something no one expected, and when she did, the atmosphere inside her dimly lit room shifted as though the walls themselves were listening. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were steady when she spoke. "Bring me the box." At first, no one understood. There was no box in her room, no box anyone had ever seen her with. But she repeated it, softer, almost like a plea, her thin hand gripping the sheets as if that unseen box was the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. The family, already strained by months of unanswered questions, sleepless nights, and unspoken fears, exchanged looks of unease. A box. What box? And why now? After all this silence, all this waiting, it was her brother, Daniel, who finally asked. He stood by the doorway, his frame caught in the shadow between hallway and room, and his voice shook in the stillness. "Clara." "What box?" She turned her eyes toward him, those hollow eyes that had once been bright, but now seemed to see things beyond the room, beyond the living. And with a calm that chilled him to his core, she answered, "The one buried under the old elm. Bring it to me before the week is over, or the truth will never be known." The words slipped from her lips like an incantation, and when the echo of them settled in the room, something else settled to, an invisible presence that made even the most rational minds question what had just taken root among them. No one spoke of it at first. They left the room silently, the air tight in their lungs, the request burning in their thoughts. But the question had been planted. What box and what truth was she speaking of? From that night onward, the house changed. It wasn't just Clara's sickness anymore. It was something larger, something that seemed to coil around the family like a tightening rope. They avoided speaking of the box, yet every glance carried the weight of it. Every silence was sharper, heavier. Daniel, however, could not let it go. He was the one who had always been closest to Clara, the one who remembered her laughter before it faded, the one who had carried her from garden to porch when her legs could no longer hold her weight. If she asked for this, he told himself, then there had to be a reason. But the elm she spoke of, he knew it. Everyone in town knew it. The oldest tree in the county, its gnarled roots twisting deep into the earth behind the abandoned mill. No one went there anymore. Not since the fire. Not since the stories began. Stories about what had been left buried beneath it. Daniel waited 3 nights before making his decision. On the 4th, He left the house after midnight when the town had folded itself into sleep. The streets were hushed, and even the dogs did not bark as he passed. He carried only a lantern, its light spilling weakly over the dirt path that led to the mill. The wind was restless, tugging at the flame, whispering through the tall grass like voices trying to rise from beneath the earth. When he reached the elm, his chest tightened. The tree stood like a sentinel in the moonlight, its branches bent and twisted, its bark scarred by time and fire. The ground beneath it was uneven, marked by patches where grass refused to grow. It was as though the earth itself remembered what it was asked to hide. Daniel lowered his lantern and began to dig. His hands trembled as the soil gave way, each scoop heavier than the last. Time stretched strangely in that place, and the night seemed to deepen with every inch he uncovered. Finally, his spade struck wood. He froze. There it was, the box old, rotting at the edges, its surface stained with the color of years gone by. It was small, barely large enough to hold anything of significance, yet the sight of it stole the breath from his lungs. Daniel hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to leave it buried. But Clara's voice echoed in his mind. "Bring me the box, or the truth will never be known." So he lifted it out, soil falling in clumps from its sides. The air around him seemed to shift when he touched it, colder, heavier, charged with something he could not name. He didn't open it there. He didn't dare. He carried it back through the dark streets, the box pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat, its weight far greater than its size should allow. When he returned to Clara's room, the house was silent. Only the faint creak of the old floorboards followed him. He set the box on the table beside her bed, her eyes, though weary, lit with something he had not seen in months: recognition. She reached out with trembling fingers, touching the lid as though greeting an old companion. And then she whispered, almost too faint to hear, "Now, we will see." That was the night the truth began to stir. But it would not come gently. It would unravel with sharp edges, cutting through memory, through family, through everything they thought they knew. For inside that box was not merely an object. It was a secret that had waited in silence, buried under roots and soil, until the sick girl summoned it back into the light. And as the hours stretched into dawn, the house itself seemed to hold its breath, because some truths, once unearthed, refuse to sleep again. The box sat on the small table, its edges damp with soil, its wood swollen from years underground. It looked fragile, as if the slightest touch might cause it to splinter into dust. And yet there was a strange heaviness to it, as though it had been holding its breath all these years, waiting for this moment. Clara's hand lingered on the lid, trembling, her fingers pale and thin. Daniel watched her closely, his own breath shallow, his chest aching with the weight of questions he dared not voice. For the first time in months, Clara's eyes had life in them, not the gentle glow of recovery, but something sharper, colder. Recognition, anticipation. She didn't open it. Not then. Instead, she let her hand rest upon it as though drawing strength from whatever lay within. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but the words cut with precision. "It isn't for me to open. Not yet." Daniel frowned. Then, why? She turned her gaze on him, and he fell silent. The look in her eyes was enough. It wasn't anger or fear, it was something heavier, something that warned him not to push too far. "You've done what I asked," she whispered. "Now the rest will come." She sank back against her pillow, her frail body seeming even smaller under the blankets. Her breathing steadied, her eyes closed, and for a moment it looked as though exhaustion had claimed her. Daniel wanted to ask more, wanted to shake her awake and demand answers. But something inside him, something primal and unexplainable, kept him still. The box remained on the table, silent, but its presence filled the room. That night, Daniel barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, he felt the weight of the box pressing against him. Even though it remained by Clara's bedside, he dreamed of soil, of roots curling through his hands, of shadows moving just beyond the reach of his lantern's glow. And always, always, the image of Clara's eyes lit not with weakness, but with knowing. By morning, word had spread. It wasn't clear how no one in the family had spoken of it. Yet somehow the town had learned. Whispers carried faster than the wind in places like this. And by the time the sun rose over the rooftops, people were already asking questions. They said Clara had demanded something. They said Daniel had gone to the elm. They said a box had been unearthed. No one knew what was inside it, but everyone wanted to know. Asterisk neighbors arrived under the guise of kindness, bearing bread or broth. Though their eyes kept flicking toward the room where Clara lay, they stayed longer than necessary, waiting, listening, hoping for a slip of the tongue that would reveal more. The family grew uneasy. The air in the house was thick with tension, and each member carried it differently. Daniel kept silent, carrying the burden of knowledge like a stone in his chest. Their mother, pale and weary, avoided even glancing at the box, as though its very sight might curse her. Their father grew restless, pacing the floors, muttering under his breath about nonsense, about how the town was feeding itself on their suffering. But Clara was calm, to calm, asterisk. 3 days passed. Clara neither worsened nor improved, but her demeanor shifted. She spoke less of her pain, less of her weariness, and more of waiting, always waiting. She said the words as if she knew something was coming, something inevitable. On the third night, Daniel returned to her room. The lanterns glow-painted long shadows on the walls, and the box seemed darker than ever, as though the night clung to it. Clara was awake, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He sat beside her. Clara, what's in the box? Her lips curved in the faintest shadow of a smile. Not what you think. Not what anyone thinks. Daniel's frustration cracked through his restraint. Then tell me, please. You're scaring everyone. You're scaring me. Her eyes shifted toward him, steady, unblinking. Good, she said softly. Fear keeps you awake. You'll need to stay awake. He felt a chill run through him. He wanted to press her further, but before he could, she closed her eyes again. And with her silence, the conversation ended. The box remained unopened, and with each day that passed, the tension grew heavier. The whispers in town grew louder, and Daniel's unease deepened. For though the box was still, it did not feel still. There were nights when Daniel swore he heard sounds coming from Clara's room, faint, muffled, like the creak of wood, or the shift of something moving inside. He told himself it was imagination, the tricks of a tired mind. But doubt settled in him like rot. On the 6th night, he could bear it no longer. He rose from his bed long after midnight, the house steeped in silence, and crept to Clara's room. The door creaked softly as he opened it. The lantern on the table had long gone cold. Clara was asleep, her face pale in the moonlight streaming through the cracked curtain. And there, beside her, the box sat in shadow. Daniel stepped closer. His breath quickened. He reached for it and froze. The lid was slightly ajar. Asterisk Daniel's hand trembled above the box. He hadn't touched it, yet the lid gaped ever so slightly, enough for the moonlight to slip across its cracked edge. His chest tightened each breath. Sharp, shallow. The house was silent, so silent that he could hear the slow tick of the clock in the hall, hear the faint rasp of Clara's uneven breathing. But there was something else too. Something inside the box. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like the memory of one. A faint creak, a shift, as though wood had grown restless, as though the box itself were breathing. Daniel's throat went dry. His instinct screamed at him to turn, to walk away, to shut the door and forget he had seen it. Yet his hand betrayed him, drifting closer, fingertips brushing the worn edge of the lid. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged, expectant. He lifted the lid and Clara's voice cut through the silence. "Don't." His heart jolted. He turned. She was awake, her eyes wide open, fixed on him with an intensity that froze him where he stood. Her voice was still soft, but in that moment it carried more weight than any shout. "Not yet," she whispered. Daniel let the lid fall back into place. The sound of wood meeting wood far louder than it should have been. His chest heaved, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Clara closed her eyes again, her hand twitching against the blanket as though grasping for something unseen. "When it's time," she murmured, almost as if to herself. "Only when it's time." Daniel backed away. He could not stand the weight of that room any longer. He left her there in the moonlight, the box silent once more, but its presence burning into him like a brand. Days passed, though time itself seemed to warp in that house. Each morning felt the same as the last, each night heavier than the one before. Clara's health neither worsened nor improved. She existed in that liminal state between the living and the dying, and the family grew frayed at the edges. Daniel noticed things others seemed blind to. He noticed how the neighbors lingered near the fence line longer than before, their conversations hushed but their eyes sharp. He noticed how their father snapped at the smallest sound, how their mother avoided going near Clara's room, whispering prayers under her breath each time she passed. And he noticed the way the box seemed to draw the air from the house. Rooms felt colder now. Shadows stretched longer. Even in daylight, a heaviness clung to every corner, as if the truth waiting inside that box cast ripples through the very walls. On the 7th night, Daniel was woken by a noise. It was faint, but it pulled him upright in bed, his heart instantly pounding. He listened. At first, nothing. Then, again the sound of wood, creaking, shifting. It was coming from Clara's room. He rose, bare feet against cold floorboards, and made his way down the hallway. Each step felt louder than it should, though the house itself seemed to be holding its breath. He reached her door and paused. The noise had stopped. He pushed the door open. Moonlight spilled across the floor. Clara lay as she always did, still and pale, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. And there, beside her, sat the box. This time, the lid was open. Just a crack, but enough. Daniel stepped closer. His body felt foreign, unresponsive. Yet he kept moving, drawn by a pull he could neither resist nor understand. He leaned over the box, his eyes narrowing as he tried to glimpse what was inside. At first, he saw only darkness. The interior was deep, deeper than it should have been for such a small container, as though the bottom had been swallowed by shadow. He blinked, leaned closer. Something shifted inside. He jerked back, his breath catching in his throat. He hadn't imagined it. Something had moved. Clara stirred. Her lips parted, her voice barely a thread of sound. "It knows you now." Daniel froze. What do you mean?" Her eyes fluttered open, glistening in the moonlight, and for the first time, he saw fear there. Genuine fear. "You shouldn't have looked." The air in the room grew colder. Daniel shivered, his skin prickling as if unseen hands brushed against him. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, pressing closer. He turned to the box. The lid still sat ajar, and from within, something seemed to stir again, not visible, not clear, but palpable, Like the weight of an unseen gaze, Daniel staggered back. His breath came fast, his hands shaking. He looked to Clara, but she had closed her eyes once more, retreating into silence. Leaving him alone with the thing he had disturbed. By dawn, the house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a place under siege, its walls too thin to keep out what had been awakened. And as the sun rose over the quiet town, the whispers spread once more. They said Clara had made a strange request. They said a box had been unearthed. They said something inside had begun to move. And they were right. Morning arrived, but it did not bring relief. The house, once a place of routine even in sorrow, now felt like a chamber holding its breath. Light filtered weakly through the curtains. But even the sun seemed reluctant to enter Clara's room, where the box sat like a sentinel beside her bed. Daniel hadn't slept. He'd sat in the chair across from his sister all night, watching the box, watching her, waiting for movement, waiting for sound. Nothing came. Clara slept, pale and still, her breath shallow but steady, as though the night had not touched her at all. Yet Daniel knew it had. He could still feel the cold that had sunk into his bones, could still see the way shadows had shifted as though aware of him. Worst of all, he could still hear her words. "It knows you now." By mid-morning, the family was gathered around the kitchen table. Their mother fussed with teacups that no one would drink from. Their father sat rigid, staring at the wall as though trying to force his mind elsewhere. Daniel sat silent, turning his hands over again and again, watching the dirt still trapped under his fingernails from the night he dug. Finally, their father broke the silence. "We need to get rid of it." The words hung in the air like smoke. Their mother flinched, dropping a spoon, the clatter echoing too loudly. Daniel looked up sharply, his chest tightening. "Get rid of what?" he asked, though he already knew. "The box." Their father's voice was rough, unyielding. "It never should have been dug up. That tree, there were reasons nobody went near it. Reasons people left things buried." Their mother whispered a prayer under her breath, but Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Clara asked for it. She said it mattered. She's sick." Their father snapped, sick and delirious. "You should never have listened." And now, he trailed off, pressing a hand against his temple. His knuckles were white. "Now it feels like this whole house is suffocating." Daniel wanted to argue, but the truth was, his father wasn't wrong. The air did feel heavier, the rooms colder, even the light seemed thinner, as though struggling to hold back whatever seeped from that box. But still, Clara had asked for it, and that meant something. Before Daniel could respond, their mother spoke, her voice trembling. "We cannot throw it away. She will know. She will suffer for it." Daniel looked at her. There was fear in her eyes, not just of the box, but of Clara herself. And for the first time, Daniel realized their mother was afraid of her daughter. The whispers in town grew louder that day. Daniel could hear them from the porch as people passed. Their voices pitched low, but not low enough. Words like cursed and buried for a reason. Some swore the elm tree had burned because of what lay beneath it. Others said the family had dug up something that should have remained forgotten. Children dared each other to creep near the house, only to run shrieking when the curtains shifted. The air of the ordinary had vanished. In its place was an unspoken consensus. Something was wrong in that house, and whatever it was spreading. That evening, Clara spoke again. Daniel sat at her bedside, weary from the day's tension. When she opened her eyes, her gaze found the box immediately, as though she had never truly looked away from it. "It's waking," she whispered. Daniel stiffened. "What do you mean?" Her lips twitched in the shadow of a smile, though it wasn't a happy one. "It's been waiting. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for someone to see it." Daniel swallowed hard. And now her gaze shifted to him. Now it sees you." The words landed like a stone in his chest. He wanted to demand answers, wanted to pry the truth from her frail body, but the look in her eyes stopped him. There was no madness there, no fevered rambling. There was certainty, and certainty was far more frightening. That night, the box opened further. No one touched it. No one dared. But when Daniel returned to her room after midnight, the lid was open a full inch, revealing only blackness inside. Clara lay awake, her eyes wide, fixed on it. She didn't look at Daniel when he entered. She didn't even blink. "Do you hear it?" she asked softly. Daniel froze. The room was silent, save for the faint groan of the old house settling. "I don't hear anything," he whispered. Clara's lips parted, and her breath caught on something halfway between laughter and sobbing. "That's because it isn't speaking to you yet." The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, pulling tighter. The air grew colder, and for the first time, Daniel felt it, not a sound exactly, but a vibration, a presence pulsing faintly from the box. Alive. Watching. Waiting. The next day, Clara's condition shifted. Her cheeks, once ghostly pale, flushed with a faint hint of color. Her eyes, though still sunken, seemed brighter, stronger. Her voice carried more weight when she spoke. The family should have rejoiced, but instead, unease grew, because her improvement came not from medicine, not from prayer, but in direct proportion to the box. The longer it sat open by her bed, the more strength she seemed to regain, and the more the family began to fracture. Their father refused to step foot in the room now. Their mother prayed longer, cried more often, muttering that Clara was changing, that this was not healing, but something else entirely. And Daniel felt himself torn between relief at his sister's improvement and terror at the price it seemed to demand. For though Clara grew stronger, the rest of the house weakened. Windows groaned against their frames. Mirrors warped subtly, bending reflections. Doors swelled as though the wood itself feared what shared its space. And always, the box sat open wider than before. On the 5th night of its opening, Daniel dreamed again. He dreamed of roots curling through soil, wrapping around his arms and legs, pulling him downward. He dreamed of voices whispering in a language he couldn't understand, a chorus rising from the darkness beneath the elm tree. He dreamed of Clara standing, whole, her eyes burning bright, reaching toward him. And when he woke, his hand was outstretched in the dark, reaching back. Beside him, the box sat at his bed. He hadn't moved it there. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. The box sat on the floor beside his bed, its lid open wider now, wide enough that he could see down into its black interior. It was wrong he had left it in Clara's room. He remembered it clearly. He remembered the way it had sat against her nightstand, the moonlight spilling across it, Clara's thin hand resting close. Yet here it was. He sat frozen in the dark, the silence of the house pressing down on him. He half expected his father to storm in, his mother to gasp from the hall, but no one came. The house was still, too still. Slowly, Daniel leaned forward. The air around the box was cold, unnaturally so, as if it were drawing heat into itself. His hand hovered above it, trembling. A faint sound stirred from inside. Not a voice, not words, but the soft scrape of something shifting against wood. Daniel recoiled, his chest heaving. The scrape stopped. Clara's voice broke the silence from the doorway. "You shouldn't fear it." "Not now." He turned sharply. She stood in the hall, unsupported, her thin frame silhouetted by the faint glow of lantern light. For the first time in months, she was on her feet. Daniel could barely speak. "Clara, you..." She stepped into the room, her bare feet silent against the wood. Her eyes gleamed, sharper now, no longer dulled by illness. She moved toward the box, crouched beside it, and laid her hand gently on the lid. "It listens," she whispered. "It remembers." Daniel's voice shook. "What is it, Clara?" Her eyes met his. The truth. By morning, Clara was walking again. The family stared as she descended the stairs, her hand trailing along the banister for support, but her step steady, her breath not as shallow as before. Their mother burst into tears, clasping her daughter's hands, whispering prayers of gratitude, though her eyes flickered nervously toward Daniel. Their father, however, did not rejoice. His expression was grim, his jaw clenched. He said nothing as Clara sat at the table for the first time in months, sipping broth slowly, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Daniel watched her carefully. She was stronger, yes, but different. Something about the way she moved, the way she spoke, as though her illness had not been cured, but replaced. That evening, the whispers in town grew sharper. People claimed to have seen Clara standing in the upstairs window, her silhouette tall and still, staring down at the street. Some said her eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Others swore they heard strange sounds when passing the house at night, low murmurs, like voices overlapping, though no one inside could be seen speaking. Fear took root in the town, and fear spreads quickly. Neighbors who once brought bread and broth now kept their distance. Children who once played near the fence now crossed to the other side of the street. And late at night, Daniel thought he saw figures lingering at the edges of their property, watching the house with grim curiosity. Inside, Clara grew bolder. She no longer confined herself to bed. She walked through the rooms, touching the walls, pausing at windows, standing in doorways as though reacquainting herself with a home she had not truly known before. And always, the box was nearby. At first, Daniel thought she moved it herself, but there were nights when he woke to find it outside his door. Mornings when it sat at the foot of the stairs, though no one had touched it. Once, he found it resting on the kitchen table, his father pale and silent on the other side, refusing to look at it. And each time it moved, Clara seemed stronger. On the 9th night, Daniel confronted her. He found her in a parlor, standing by the window, the box open on the table beside her. Moonlight poured across the floor, catching the hollow angles of her face. "Clara," he said quietly, "what's happening to you?" She turned, her eyes reflecting the pale light, her expression unreadable. "I asked you to bring me the box," she said. "You did. Now it gives back what was lost." Daniel shook his head. "Lost? Lost to who?" She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "To all of us." The words sent a chill down his spine. "Clara, you're scaring everyone. Mother can't even look at you anymore. Father," her voice cut sharp, "Father knows more than he says." Daniel froze, the certainty in her tone, the edge of accusation. It unsettled him more than anything she had said before. "What do you mean?" he whispered. But Clara only turned back to the window, her hand brushing the open lid of the box. "The truth is coming, whether he speaks it or not." 2 days later, the first strange occurrence happened outside the house. A neighbor, Mrs. Hale, was found collapsed near the elm tree. She had gone there at dusk, for reasons unknown, and was discovered hours later, trembling, unable to speak. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open, but no sound came from her throat. She lived, but she could not say what she had seen. The town whispered louder now. They said the family had unleashed something. They said Clara's recovery was unnatural. They said Daniel had dug too deep. And at night, Daniel swore the box pulsed faintly in the dark, as though with a heartbeat of its own. By the 12th night, the house was no longer merely uneasy. It was hostile. Doors swelled shut even in dry weather. Lanterns flickered and died without reason. Objects shifted in the dark, small things at first, books sliding from shelves, cups toppling. Chairs angled toward corners as though someone had been sitting there moments before. And through it all, Clara thrived. Her voice grew stronger. Her step steadier. She even laughed, once an eerie sound after so many months of silence. But Daniel could not shake the feeling that his sister was no longer entirely herself. One night, as rain lashed the windows, Daniel heard movement downstairs. He rose, lantern in hand, and crept into the hall. The sound was faint but deliberate, footsteps across the floorboards, heavier than Clara's. Slower than his father's, he descended the stairs, each creak of wood echoing too loudly in the storm's gnarled silence. In the parlor, the lanterns glow caught the box. It was open again, wider than ever before, and beside it stood Clara, her back to him. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. She was listening. Daniel's lantern flickered, nearly dying, as a sound rose faintly from within the box. Whispers. Low, overlapping, countless voices, speaking at once. Clara tilted her head, as though straining to hear. More clearly, Daniel's grip on the lantern tightened, his knuckles white. "Clara," he whispered, his voice hoarse. She turned slowly. Her eyes met his. And in her expression, Daniel saw the truth that chilled him to his very core. It wasn't relief. It wasn't help. It was devotion. She was no longer just a girl recovering from sickness. She was a vessel. And the box had chosen her. The storm did not break the next morning. Rain hammered the roof in unrelenting waves. The sky low and gray, as though the world itself had bent closer to watch the house. The family sat in silence round the table, their faces pale, their eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Clara did not sit with them. She had taken her meals in her room for days now, though meals was no longer the right word. She ate little, she drank less, yet somehow she grew stronger. Her voice had weight now. Her presence filled every space she entered. And always, the box was near. Daniel stared at his father. The old man's face was hard, but behind his eyes was something else, something restless, afraid. Clara's words echoed in Daniel's mind. "Father knows more than he says." The silence stretched, broken only by the rain. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Tell us," he said softly, his father's head lifted. "Tell you what?" Daniel's voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "About the box, about the elm, about why it was buried." Their mother's hand trembled around her teacup, porcelain clinking against porcelain. She whispered his name, a warning, a plea. But Daniel did not look away. His father's jaw tightened. He stared at his son for a long moment, then at the rain-streaked window, as though weighing whether the storm outside was safer than the truth inside. When he spoke, his voice was low. It was never supposed to be found. Daniel leaned forward. "What is it?" His father's gaze darkened. "Not what. Who?" The word struck like a blow. Daniel's stomach knotted. His mother closed her eyes, her lips moving in prayer. His father continued. "Long before you were born, there was a family here, not ours, another. They lived by the mill. Under the elm, they were respected, feared, too. They had a daughter, a girl who fell sick, much like Clara. But hers was not a natural sickness. She heard things, saw things, spoke things no one else could. Her parents tried to hide it. The town would not allow it." He paused, his voice rough. "They bound what lived inside her. They sealed it in the box, buried it beneath the elm, where roots would hold it fast. The fire that burned the mill, that was no accident. It was meant to warn, to keep people away, to remind us that some things must remain buried. Daniel's blood ran cold. His mind flashed to the whispers in the dark, the pulse of the box, Clara's sudden recovery. "You knew," he whispered. "All this time you knew what it was." His father's eyes were heavy with guilt. "I knew enough to keep you away from that tree. But I never thought," he trailed off, shaking his head. "I never thought she would ask for it." Upstairs, Clara laughed. It was faint, drifting down through the floorboards. But it silenced the room. The family froze, their eyes lifting toward the ceiling. Daniel's chest tightened. The sound was not cruel, not mocking. It was worse. It was joyful. The laugh of someone who had found exactly what they were looking for. By nightfall, the town was at their door. Lanterns glowed through the rain, bobbing like restless stars as neighbors gathered, their faces pale, their voices sharp. They demanded answers. They demanded the box. They demanded Clara. Daniel stood at the window, his fists clenched. Fear radiated from the crowd, but fear could turn to violence quickly. His father stood in the doorway, barring it with his body, his voice steady as he told them to leave. But the crowd did not leave. They lingered, whispering, waiting. And in their silence, Daniel felt the truth. They were not going to let this rest. Not anymore. Inside, Clara moved like a shadow. She drifted from room to room, her eyes alight with something not entirely her own. The box followed her, though no one ever saw her carry it. It simply appeared wherever she stopped, its lid always open, its darkness always waiting. Daniel cornered her in the hallway, desperation sharpening his voice. "Clara, listen to me. This thing, it isn't healing you. It's using you." Her expression softened, almost pitying. "Don't you see, Daniel? I was never sick. Not truly. I was chosen. It waited for me. It called for me. And now, at last, it has what it needs." His throat tightened. "And what does it need?" Her smile was small, chilling. A voice. The storm raged. The crowd outside grew louder. The house groaned under the weight of both. And at midnight, the box opened fully. Daniel was there to see it. He had not meant to be. His body had moved on instinct, drawn to Clara's room as though pulled by unseen hands. He stood in the doorway as the lid fell back, revealing not objects, not bones, but a depth impossible for such a small container. A void, a pit of shadow that seemed to stretch forever downward. Whispers surged up from it, clearer now, countless. Voices rising in unison. The walls rattled, the lanterns flickered, the air turned sharp and cold. Clara stood beside it, her arms outstretched, her face alight with rapture. Daniel staggered back, his pulse thundering. Clara stopped. She turned toward him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "It's too late, Daniel. The truth cannot be buried again." The box shuddered. The voices rose. And for the first time, Daniel understood. It was never just Clara's sickness. It was never just a box. It was a prison. And now, it was opening. Outside, the crowd cried out as the storm split the sky with light. Inside, the house trembled as shadows bled from the box, stretching across the floor, climbing the walls, reaching. Daniel rushed forward, seizing Clara's arm, trying to pull her back. Her body was warm to warm, feverish with power, but she did not resist. She only smiled. "Now you see, brother. Now you understand." The shadows surged upward, and the voices spoke as one, not in words, but in truth. And the truth was unbearable.